So I need to tell you a story. Okay, it's not that serious. About 15 years ago, I arrived at what I call an in between place in my life. Before that in between time, I was the pastor of this really awesome church. It was outside of Kansas City. I love that place. But that's when I first met Elle. She lived in Amarillo, Texas, which was 626 miles away. Her sister PJ was an old friend of mine, so that's how we met. We fell in love and we tried to figure out how to have a long distance relationship, but we realized that a long distance relationship, that just wasn't going to cut it for us. So we decided it made sense for me to move to Amarillo and take a job working for a state agency there, which turned out to be a horrible fit, both for me and for the state of Texas. In fact, my old boss might even be watching today, a really marvelous guy named Gary. Hey, Gary. That kind of thing just happens sometimes. I was a minister, but that job required a very different skill set, like, math skills, spreadsheet skills. Anyway, finding work as a minister in a place like Amarillo just was not panning out for me. So, as a stopgap measure, just to have something to do, really, and what I thought was just going to be this in between moment, I walked into the Starbucks where I was a regular customer, and I asked to see the manager. He thought I had a complaint, but I told him no, I wanted to apply for a job as a barista. He stared at me, looked at my resume, and said, "Really?" So the next day, there I was wearing a green apron and learning how to make skinny vanilla lattes. I was 44 years old. Most of my coworkers were young enough to be my kids. They wanted to know why an old geezer like me would want to work in a coffee shop. And I told them I was doing research on human behavior, which was a joke. But it turned out to be true. It was fascinating to interact with other people in a place like that. But what I learned most was something about myself. After years of being in charge and sitting at the head of a table at meetings that felt really important, after years of speaking in front of big crowds and being regarded as an authority, there I was, sweeping and mopping and hauling these big leaky bags of trash out into a stinky dumpster. There I was, asking people if they wanted whipped cream on their Frappuccino. They always did, of course. There I was, getting yelled at in front of dozens of other people, employees and customers, by some young banker because his Americano wasn't the perfect temperature. Sorry, William. I'll redo it. There I was, opening up the store at 5 a.m. in the winter after shoveling snow from the sidewalk. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. It was not an in-between time at all. And that was true because the biggest awakening in my time at Starbucks had to do with the odd juxtaposition of what was a guy like me working in a place like that. Some people actually ask me, did I just get out of prison or what? That kind of question itself says something about what we value as a society: status, wealth, power. The expectations and biases we have that certain kinds of work are valued less than others, particularly service work, is devalued. A customer one day asked me if I had any ambition beyond Starbucks. I said, well, I'm happy, and isn't that what matters most? She just walked away like something was seriously wrong with me. So, as odd as it sounds, I love my Starbucks experience, not because I learned how to make a fantastic iced white chocolate mocha. I did. And not because I was knocked off any high horse I'd been on. I really don't think I ever took myself all that seriously to begin with, even if I took my work seriously. And there's a difference. It was simply because I rediscovered what it meant to be a servant. And even more importantly, I rediscovered how we can all understand ourselves as servants, no matter what we do or what's going on in the world. I learned again how much fun it is to simply be focused on serving others, how it made me feel like I was doing what I was meant to do on a very basic level. That I was in on a secret that's really not a secret at all, that the highest form of human expression is service. and that the world that God envisions for all of us is one where getting outside of our own needs and giving ourselves away is the most natural and the most sacred form of God's presence. Now, of course, you serve people when you're a minister like me, and it's fun and meaningful work too. The thing is, I learned again that the role that you play in life, what you do for a living, doesn't matter nearly as much as how you understand the larger purpose of your life. You know, we come into the world with nothing and we exit with nothing. What matters is the positive impact you make in whatever role you play, if you're walking through the world as a true servant or not. So one day Jesus was sitting with his followers, his disciples and others, discussing just that topic. He had recently had some public conversations, or really confrontations, with a couple of different groups of religious leaders who did not care for Jesus very much. What he represented threatened them. Now, one group, the Sadducees, they were very politically powerful. They were the aristocrats and the priests, and religiously they were fundamentalists. Jesus was definitely not a fundamentalist, nor was he rich or powerful. So Sadducees considered him this hick from the sticks, and he was a troublemaker. The other group was the Pharisees. Now, they weren't fundamentalists really, but they had a very high opinion of themselves as the most accurate and holy interpreters of Jewish religious law. So they were the experts. They hated the Sadducees, but they hated Jesus even more, because he seemed to go out of his way to flout the law any chance he could. Now, both groups would occasionally send some poor sucker to attempt to trip up Jesus with what they thought was an impossible religious question that would embarrass Jesus publicly. Now, their first mistake was to think that Jesus even cared what other people thought about him. Their second mistake was that after all those encounters with Jesus, they consistently went away with their tail tucked between their legs. So on that particular day, Jesus sat with his followers to talk about why people like that, who are all high and mighty, behave so high and mighty in the first place. He points out their hypocrisy, that they spend their days chattering away about how righteous they are by obeying this rule and that regulation and one doctrine or another. And they take great pains to make sure everybody witnesses them being all pious. It's a role they're playing out in front of others. It makes them feel good and important and part of the in crowd, and they get to congratulate themselves on being so fabulous. They even claim to be serving others by serving the greater good, because if everyone else would only follow their pristine example, society's problems would be solved. But behaving piously and following strict religious rules and regulations is never the answer, Jesus says. What matters is how you regard and treat and serve your neighbor. And your neighbor is everybody. Watch carefully, Jesus says, how these clowns treat others. They don't lift a finger to do justice or feed the hungry or clothe the naked or anything else that the law of God's love actually requires. They're so caught up in the role of being faithful servants of God that they've completely forgotten what it means to really serve. What they've truly forgotten is that serving others is the highest form of serving God. They've forgotten the real purpose of life. But when we internalize servanthood as our essential identity and role in life, whatever outward role or thing we might do for a living, something amazing happens. The kingdom of God is made real. So, this could be a pretty simple episode where Jesus pointed out the hypocrisy of super religious people, and we could move on and tell ourselves, well, we would never act like that. Except the message is much deeper. Jesus is asking all of us to evaluate our most basic role in life, our essential purpose in life, and rededicate ourselves to servanthood at the core of who we are. Last Sunday, Meg Gambino preached for us on the greatest commandment. She reminded us that Jesus said there is no higher purpose, no higher law of life than to love our neighbor as ourselves. So our question every day is, how do we do that? Because loving our neighbor is not a warm and fuzzy emotion. It's not a philosophy. It's not something we do to earn brownie points with God. Loving our neighbor is just something that we do. And we do it not by talking about it, but by actually, literally serving others. And it's not a lifestyle choice, it's a life. And you and me in particular, because we do follow the life and the work and the teaching and the example of Jesus as our chosen path, we need to own up to the fact that he said loving and serving is the most important work we will ever do. Now, it's hard, persistent, risk-taking work to love and serve, but the impact of living that way changes everything. Now, if you're like me, you're more than a little anxious about the outcome of the election on Tuesday. What will it say about us? And what will it bring out in us, regardless of the outcome? I think it's worth stepping back and asking ourselves, why do the stakes feel so high? Why is it that we see so many examples of distrust and anger and fear of each other? Is it because we're exhausted by the trauma and the grief and the dread and the total turning upside down of our lives this pandemic has caused, and all of the glaring inequities it's exposed about our society? Is that it? Well, of course. Is it because we worry about our economy and more people losing jobs and businesses closing? Of course. Is it because our planet continues to fry like an egg on a skillet while there are people in positions of power who don't believe in science? Of course. Are we heartsick because we've witnessed soul-crushing racial injustice and we're still struggling with what to do about that? Of course. Are we afraid that the fabric of what unites us in a common cause of seeking equality and justice for all is unraveling into tribalism and more division and groups of bigoted crackers calling themselves militias? They're running around with automatic weapons. Grown-up G.I. Joes. Of course. Do we wish 2020 would just get over with already? Let's cut it short by a couple months. I'd be good with that. Of course. But here's another way of thinking about all of that. To see this year and all that we're going through as an opportunity, as a golden opportunity, to rethink, reset, and recommit ourselves to loving and serving our neighbors, of reawakening to that higher reality as what we were born to do and how we best thrive as human beings. Now, first, I think we need to take a deep breath. Go ahead. It works. And remember that this week and in every day and every week to come, whatever happens, you and I have a special job. It is the one thing and the most important thing each of us can do to make real that vision Jesus had of the kingdom of God. Which, by the way, is a phrase that's been misconstrued as something God does for us, as if we can sit back like we're watching a movie. What, Martha? Here comes that kingdom of God. But that's not how the kingdom of God works, my friends. It's not out there somewhere, but it's here in our hearts, waiting to get out. We are God's arms and legs and voices, so you know what? It's our job. Now, it's not easy work, but at least it's focused on one thing, and that's this. Just love your neighbor as yourself, whoever your neighbor may be, by serving them, one relationship at a time, one friend at a time, one family member at a time, one stranger at a time. And when you're out doing that holy work, remember how much you are already loved and how you have been served and how that love lives in you and how that love is the very presence of God that knits all of us together. Remember that because of that love, we are already more connected than we are ever divided. And when we act on that love and regard and serve our neighbor with a loving kindness that defeats fear and brings hope and heals brokenness and tears down walls and restores civility and clarity and resurrects justice and gives birth to peace, one person at a time, then we are fully living in the present sacred moment called the kingdom of God, and the only law of that kingdom is love.